get started. My name is Stephanie Roberts. I am the Director of Partnerships and Multi-Tiered Systems of Support for Mount Diablo Unified. I'm also the co-host of this amazing mental health panel. And this is our sixth one for the school year. We actually have a few more coming. We're just going to let you know kind of who's in the Zoom with us tonight. And then we'll do some introductions and then let you know what to expect. We will be, we're planning on being with you tonight for about an hour and 15 minutes. So sit back, relax, and we hope you enjoy the evening. So we'll start with Felicia and Wendy. If you can just introduce yourselves for us, please. Felicia.
I was letting Wendy.
They were being so polite. They're both doing this.
Good evening. I'm Felicia Stuckey-Smith. I'm Director of Student Services and I'd like to welcome everyone here tonight.
Good evening. I'm Wendy Aguirre, and I am the Chief of Pupil Services and Special Education for the school district, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. And we've got an amazing panel tonight, and we're going to start out with Paula. If she can introduce herself.
Good evening. My name is Paula Barker. I am a counselor in alternative education at Olympic High School.
Thank you.
I'm Mandy Gans, and I am a counselor at Summit High School, which is also a continuation high school. I have almost exclusively worked with continuation high school students.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Leanne Owen. I am a counselor at Northgate High School.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. And I am Angela Stewart. I am a counselor at Sequoia Middle School and also a parent of a 14-year-old and a 17-year-old.
Great. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Brian Rada, and I am a counselor at Mount Diablo High School. I am also a parent of 3 children, one 14-year-old, a 12-year-old, and an 8-year-old, my 8-year-old daughter who thinks she's a teenager. So this is very applicable. Hopefully I can share my experiences with what I've done with counseling and my own personal experiences with everyone.
Thank you, Brian. We also have our favorite interpreter, Rossi. And so at the bottom of the screen, if you are looking for simultaneous translation, you would just click join, and then you'll be able to hear everything in your primary language in a breakout room. So if you see that and you're interested, please click there. And thank you, Rossi, for joining us as always. All right, so now you know who's in the Zoom. We are going to get started and let you know what to expect for tonight. We have gathered a variety of questions from past panels, as well as questions that the staff have heard over the last couple of months around what it's like and the challenges and trials and the joys of parenting a teen and a tween. If you can let us know who's with us live tonight and just put in the chat, are you a student? Are you a parent? Are you a staff member? Just helping us know who we're kind of speaking to live tonight. It really does help our panelists. And we also encourage you, if you have comments or questions, you can put those in the chat. My co-hosts Felicia and Wendy will be watching that very closely. And at the end of every question, we will come back and circle around, see if there's anything in the chat that we need to address. And our panelists will also be watching that. So we see lots of parents, we've got counselors, oh gosh, parents of 5th, 8th, and 12th grader. So this really does help us kind of identify who's with us live tonight. We also want to encourage you, if you haven't been able to see past panelists and the panels, those are all pre-recorded and they are on our district website under the parent portal, as well as student services under mental health webinar. You can watch those, are in English and in Spanish, and this one will be videoed and put on the district website as well. And we also want you to save a couple of dates. We have 2 more panel webinars this year, one on June 1st, and that's for if you're a parent of an elementary age, younger kid, what are the suggestions and ideas around how we support our younger kids. And then on June 22nd, helping you find community supports and summer activities to support the mental wellness and health of our students and our families and us as parents, because I know it's a whole thing and we all need that extra support. All right, so we've got, thank you everyone for engaging in the chat. We are going to get started and just start with question number 1. And the first question, Mandy's going to start us off. And that question is, how do I support a disengaged teen? Mandy?
Okay, thank you. That's the question of my entire career. How do we support a disengaged teen? Couple things. Hard to say this in just a couple minutes, but a couple things. First of all, your feelings as a parent often would be of frustration, or like you're failing somehow, or like you're not being heard, or that you feel some loss about the close relationships you had before. And it's good to keep in mind that the disengaged teen or tween is probably feeling exactly the same thing. So you want to separate all those things out a little bit and understand that the disengagement at this point in their lives is actually developmentally a pretty good choice. That's a developmentally correct choice that they're making. It's really hard to navigate it. They're not so much disengaging as they are looking for their own identity and a sense of belonging somewhere other than you. But the main thing that they really want is a sense of belonging. So even though you become, and I as the counselor become, the adults become kind of the enemy, we also do still have a place for them to belong. And we have to keep in mind when we're dealing with them to try and foster that sense of belonging still, even though they're trying to disengage. It helps me sometimes to picture these horrible teenagers and tweens as 2-year-olds, because when they're little and they're 2, they're actually going through a very similar thing, trying to separate and stand their own ground. And also, like 2-year-olds, they're still pretty innocent. There's a lot, even though it doesn't seem like they really are truly still very innocent. And if you can tap into their innocent, afraid, scared piece, then you might have some success at re-engaging.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to piggyback on that. I think, as Mandy said, it's really hard to, narrow this down in such a short amount of time. But I encourage parents to try to pinpoint where the disengagement is coming from, or what is the root of it. And I know it's hard to tell, but I think, deep down, if you do some exploration, you can figure out what it is. It could be, a lack of self-confidence, or maybe your child is bored with the content area, the subject. I know math and history, even though they're critical classes that you need to know, sometimes students find them not so exciting. So it could be that there may be a gap in their learning. Not that they missed school, but maybe they just didn't get the concepts they needed from middle school to high school. This happens a lot in math. And so just being able to know that, I think, can help identify where they can get some help. And then you can, contact the school, get in touch with the teacher, and, just figure out ways in which you can, identify what some of these areas are. And the list can go on and on and on. Dealing with trauma or social issues can affect a student's ability to want to engage in classes. So really try to figure out what that is. I always tell parents, know your bottom line in regards to like setting limits. So in terms of, what are you willing to do, and then follow through with that to make sure, that your child is sitting home at night and doing their homework, or they are reaching out and contacting their teacher, things like that. So just make sure, you're following through with whatever consequence or whatever you're setting up with your student to, get them to get re-engaged. And then, as Mandy said, be real supportive. When I counsel students, I try to teach them to problem solve for themselves. So, guide them through that process. And it is new to them, especially coming to high school. I always tell students, when they're in my office, I say, well, what can you do? If they're struggling in one of their classes or with a teacher, I say, tell me what you would do, or what can you do to make this issue better? And then half the time they'll be like, I need to talk to my teacher. And I say, okay, how do we do that? And they may not feel comfortable doing face-to-face, and I offer to go in with them. But also I say, hey, you know what? Since we're doing distance learning, email your teacher right now. Pull out your Chromebook, email your teacher, and tell them exactly what you just told me. So that way, the teacher knows where they're coming from, and it helps build that self-confidence. So, the list could go on and on. I don't know how much time I have.
You're doing fine. You're doing fine.
Okay. So, Yeah, I think just teaching them to problem solve, maybe creating a schedule. A lot of students do really well with routines. So at home at night, have them sit at the table and do homework for a certain amount of time. And I think getting into a routine helps students really, it gives them that structure that they need, because as they get older and there's more freedom and more things to think about and social activities, when you get to high school, it just makes it hard for them to kind of gather all of this information. So just having a set time where they can sit down at the dinner table or in the family room or wherever it is, and where they can do their homework, I think that would help tremendously.
Thank you.
Yeah, so lastly, reach out to the counselor, reach out to your counselor, us. That's what we're here for. I think that's probably one of the best things you could do, because we are the liaison or the advocates for the students and the parents. And we will bridge that gap if you're having communication issues or just subject matter, great concerns. Reach out to the counselor. That's what we do, and we help facilitate that process. So,
Thank you.
Yeah.
You can also find a list of the counselor by school under the parent portal. You'll say secondary resources and elementary resources. And on that document are links to some resources, but down below you'll see by school, a person's name, a counselor's name that you can contact. One of the other things that I think I actually want to share is, I know we've had a lot of family time. We've all been stuck in the house for close to 9 months. We're now back getting out and being more social, but I always surprised at, I have a 16-year-old and a 19-year-old. And sometimes it's like, we'll try to have them come down and play a game or watch a family movie, and they're hooing and hawing and complaining. But when they come down, they enjoy it. And so it's kind of like what Mandy and Brian shared, is keeping that engagement and the connection, because then you're going to be more connected to them when and if they are struggling, and you won't be trying to force, well, why are you trying to talk to me now? You've let me sit up in my room for the last 10 months. Like if my kids are up in their room for multiple days, it's like, okay, let's go for a walk. Let's go do something. And they think I'm a crazy mom, but I do think that helps them re-engage, because it is really easy to go introverted, especially during this last year. And so we're seeing a lot of that disengagement in their schoolwork and in their interest in maybe distance learning. But they've also lost a lot of interaction and engagement with things that bring them joy. And so trying to find those little opportunities to engage them socially as well. Because my conversation with my son is always about school, and he's so done listening to me on that. So I have to find other fun things to talk to him about, because otherwise he just tunes me off. So in the chat, I'm kind of looking, Felicia and Wendy, anything in the chat, and then we'll come back to you, Brian. No? Okay. Brian looks like he has something to add. And for the rest of the panel, if there's any last minute thoughts for this particular question, Brian?
I just want to add something real quick. I think it's very relevant and current. Is one thing I'm noticing, and I've talked to students and they told me straight up that, they stay up really late watching, doing social media, or a big one is watching TikTok. Mm-hmm. And I will admit, this year I wanted to see what the TikTok was about, and I went down the rabbit hole. And it is very engaging, only because they're quick, 30-second videos, if that, and it just scroll through. And but you can lose track of time, and I've done it myself. And I talk to students who stay up really late doing that. And I've been on it, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, and 30 minutes went by, or an hour went by, and of nothing. So it's important. What I'm hearing is students are not getting enough sleep. They're doing it at night and they're scrolling through, and sleep is very important in terms of students being engaged. So that those physical discomforts, whether they're in pain, they're hungry, they're tired, all of that plays into their learning. And so I do know that it is easy to get wrapped up in TikTok. So please be aware of, monitor the time that your children are on that, so they are getting enough sleep and rested for school in the morning.
Thank you. From the panel, any last minute thoughts before we move on to question 2?
I would just like to add, as a parent of a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old, and they're both coming into those teen years, I'm noticing for myself that I need to model that behavior, and I need to model my time on my devices. I need to model getting stuff done in a timely manner. I'm a procrastinator at heart, and I'm noticing my 12-year-old with his middle school stuff, he's starting to do that too. And I think it's because he's watched me do it, for all these years. And so now I'm trying to look back at myself and say, okay, I need to really model good behavior so he can be engaged in school and know what that looks like. So I just wanted to add that it's really, really important as parents that we show them how to do these things.
Thank you. Okay. All right, we'll go to question 2. How can we support the differences in our children? Leanne?
Yeah, so, everyone that has multiple children at home, we recognize that they each have different personalities. They have different likes, different dislikes. They learn and study differently. And I think recognizing that they have those differences is the first step in being able to support them. So I think that as a parent, how do we do that? That's the question, right? So we need to take the time to talk to them, to listen to them, to engage with them, to observe them, ask them questions, and learn what their likes and dislikes are. And do that with each of your children. And it can take time. It's not going to be something that you learn overnight. It's going to take time if you don't already notice these things. But you need to give them a space to feel comfortable. Sometimes what I've learned is as parents, we have a preconceived notion of how we want our kids to turn out, how we want them to act, and they don't turn out that way and they don't act that way. And so we just need to figure out a way to support them. And sometimes we'll see them react to us when we're not supporting them with anxiety, low self-esteem. They have a lack of self-confidence. And I think it's important that we recognize those behaviors and their reactions to us. For me as a parent, like I said, I have a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old, and they're both boys. I see a lot of differences in them, and they both like to play sports. They both love to play video games, but one is an extrovert and one's an introvert. One, I have to make time and make sure that I give him lots of play dates. And the other one, I have to make sure that I allow him to go up to his room and spend time by himself, because that's where his energy comes from. I also have one that's really sensitive to criticism and one that just will take it and change. I have one that makes friends really easily and one that needs a little bit of help finding friends. And then with school, self-disclosure, one of them has dyslexia. He has a learning difference, and I have to approach that differently. His academics, I have to spend a little bit more time with him than I do with the other one, because the other one, school comes really, really easily for him. The other thing that I think as a parent is that I have to know how my kids are reacting to the time that I spend with each one of them differently. And so having open conversations, my student my son who does really well in school and doesn't have dyslexia, I don't spend as much time with him working with his academics, and he asks me why sometimes. And so I have to be honest and explain, well, your brother has this and he just needs a little extra help. So I think as parents, if we can recognize those differences, approach our kids differently, I think it might make it a little bit easier for us to connect with them and to help them along their way, and finding what works for them just to support their different needs. I think is just a big part of just being a parent. And, reach out to the teachers and reach out to the counselor and let them know, hey, this is how my kid does. If you see them not reacting to other students, sitting at lunch by themselves, it's because they're an introvert and they just need that time. Don't be worried. Or maybe it's the opposite. They're talking a lot in class because that's just where their energy comes from. And I think it's helpful for us as, the school personnel to kind of just know these things about our individual kids, so we can just help them be creative and support them and just grow while they're in school.
Thank you, Leanne. From the chat, Felicia and Wendy, anything that we should address?
So there's one question really about knowing how much to push and figuring out how to, where you want to draw the line. The word they used is hard-nosed about grades and, how significant should we, how big of a deal should we make of it this year, given everything that's going on?
Is there any panelists that would like to address that?
I can talk on that. I would exercise a little latitude. Teachers are doing the same. We know it's been a struggle. Here's the way I look at it when I talk to parents and students. We get that this has been a really tough year and students are struggling and they're falling behind, but there's a little give and take. So I tell students, I understand that, the workload is different. You're not engaged. You're not seeing your teacher face to face. It makes it harder. However, that doesn't mean that, you can't not do assignments or, you don't need to have your camera off. There's no reason for it to be off. Have your camera on, participate. Do the best that you can. And, teachers are more than willing to work with students. But we see a lot of students who kind of go a step further and maybe use it as an excuse and to get away with a little more than they probably could. So just be aware of what your child is doing in terms of the effort that they're putting in. I would give, like I said, a little latitude. I do understand that this is a really tough year and teachers do too, but at the same time, it's not a pass to not do any schoolwork. So, do your best, try to get in as many assignments as you can. There really shouldn't be any reason for missing assignments. However, I know it's harder to get help. So if there's a few missing assignments, I tell students, get in what you can, keep turning those assignments in, and, it will help your grade out regardless of, what would happen in person. That may not be the case, but through distance learning, any assignment counts and teachers are thrilled to be getting any type of work. So, I just say, give it your best. And, if your best is, you're doing your best and your grade is still, struggling a little bit, hopefully when we come back in person, we can adjust that. So I would say, give your child a little bit of latitude, but make sure they are, putting forth some effort for sure.
The one other thing that I would add to is there's an opportunity to empower and model for your children when they're struggling or when they're having a difficult time, how they can help connect and talk with their teacher or their counselor. And so there's been multiple times in our last year where we've said, okay, let's write an email to your principal. And then my son would be pleasantly surprised that the teacher's like, oh, and they had a conversation about it and they identified a plan. But if your teachers don't know that your child is struggling, there's no accommodations or adjustments that we can do. And so that is a really big life lesson too, when you know to advocate and share and communicate that you're having a struggle and then seeing that there's a positive reaction from that. And if there isn't a positive reaction, it doesn't mean you give up, you just keep trying. I also see a couple of questions. Yeah, Wendy, is there something we want to?
There's 4 more questions,
Okay.
so I wanted to point that out. The first one would be about what do you do when your child really says nothing is motivating and nothing you try or do is motivating? And there's some other more specific questions after that one.
Okay, so we do have a couple of questions that I think that we'll get to the motivation, and then we'll kind of keep monitoring the questions and see if there's anything that we can tie up in the upcoming questions.
And then
Okay.
another one is specifically about enforcing the rules. Not only how far are you going to push them, but what can they do if the child already has some sort of concerns around their mental health? And then, where do you, quote, lay down the law, but not necessarily push them over the edge?
Right. And I would highly encourage, there's a couple of other webinars that we've done in previous months, when to get help outside of the home, some detailed suggestions around if your child's suffering from anxiety and depression. The anxiety and depression was in April, and then when to get help outside of the home for mental health and self-harm and depression was in March. So those are also great videos to also reference if we don't get in detail to those topics tonight. Okay, so we're going to go to question 3, and please keep the chat going. It does definitely help us kind of respond to what you're asking as well. Angela's going to start out here. How to help your teen find their own identity and create positive peer influences. So how do you help your teen?
Yeah, well, hi everyone. So in my mind, you can't really talk about the teen years without talking about identity and kind of peer influence, peer pressure. And you might be thinking like, why? We all know that positive self-esteem is one of those things we've heard everyone talk about. It is a key to success and also happiness. That's kind of what we all want for our kids. And with the teens, we know that their peers are one of the biggest influences and impactors of their choices, their behavior, and their direction in this life. I mean, they also have us as parents, but we know that their peers play a big role in this. And I tend to think of these years, I've had it explained to me a lot by students. One of the things that you'll get, this is like counselor confessions behind closed door, is teens describe it to me as they're feeling lost during this time. They are searching for something. We know, right now they become extremely self-conscious. I hear a lot, they tend to think the whole world is looking at them. Everyone was looking at me, and so this is the lens that they're viewing the world from. And so I think it's super important to always remember that as a parent, that they have a different lens than we do. And if we have really good memories, we can maybe even go back there and channel that stage in life, but it's tough and it's tricky. And so what we're seeing through research and through a lot of things that we know, if you can create this positive self-esteem, then it really helps them navigate through these tricky situations that they'll get in with their peers. And one of the things that I think is interesting to talk about, we know positive self-esteem with confidence, ability to adapt easily, resilience, perseverance, all these great things. But we don't really talk about those kids with low self-esteem, and we see that. And one of the things that we know with them is that they avoid new things. So that's very limiting. They might not participate in clubs or sports because they don't feel like they'll do well, or again, that lens that everyone's looking at them. They just limit themselves from challenging themselves. And we know too, students with low self-esteem can feel unwanted. It's like that we know everybody wants to belong. They're searching for this belonging. We all are. And they don't always feel like they fit in to any groups or situations. And then another thing that they can often do is they get into the habit of blaming other people. It's the teacher, it's not them. It's, my teacher didn't teach me well. I didn't understand. I wasn't paying attention, instead of taking that responsibility for what they could be doing. So but the biggest one for students with low self-esteem is that the challenge is they're so easily influenced by their peers. And so that is why this all kind of ties in, of why we want them to have this positive self-esteem. And the best news is parents do play a huge role. I heard Leanne, Mandy, Brian, those that have all mentioned this role that us parents have. And it's great because we can really help our kids with the relationship that we have. I know Stephanie even talked about dragging your kids out for game night and then they end up enjoying it. So it's just that piece right there, that we are the role models. And study after study too has shown that teens with good relationships with their parents have lower rates of experimentation with drugs, with risky behaviors, all these things. And it really stems, I think, from just that they have that confidence and that self-esteem. So probably the biggest reason that we talk about this is, how do you get your kids to have that positive self-esteem? Again, model healthy habits, ways to manage stress, your own stress. with parents, it is, what are you doing when you get really stressed? How are we showing our teens how to navigate these situations? How are we handling our relationships with, I mean, it's hard right now being all trapped in the same house, but with our spouses, with everyone, because they're watching, you know, even though we don't think they are giving your teens boundaries and limits to kind of have structure and all these things that are so important for them developmentally. And one thing that I find, especially in this middle school stage, that I'm going to share with you is the power of teaching your kids positive self-talk. It is such a critical time of life. They are, I mean, it's hard to hear the way some of these students are talking about themselves and thinking about themselves. And so one of the gifts so that I really think we can give as parents is reframing some of their thoughts and helping them figure out ways to talk to themselves in a positive way. Like, there's apps, I know, in the resource at the end of this. There's spaces for that. There's lots of different ways that you can really teach your kids to do positive self-talk. And I find it to be extremely useful in these ages, because as we know, the ultimate goal is just to have that relationship and to have your kids talk to you when stuff comes up.
Thank you, Angela. I did just add a link into the chat for those of us that are live. We do have a slide that we'll be sharing at the end of the panel, but we also have a link to that as well, so you can have a clickable link. And we also have an ongoing parent resource with all kinds of resources at the mental health webinar district website under student services. So thank you so much, Angela. Brian, would you like to add to that?
Sure. I can't emphasize enough how, you know, what Angela was saying in terms of the positive self-esteem. That is such a confidence booster for students. And I'm telling you right now, I think they can overcome any obstacle or any hurdle that they face once they learn or develop that, you know, that positive self-confidence that they need. And this might answer one of the questions that was in the chat. Somebody said, how do you enforce bedtime hours for teenagers, especially getting children off the computer, the phone, etc.? So my wife and I, you know, I'll talk about maybe the consequence piece in a minute, but I think, you know, my kids all have pretty high, well, their self-confidence level is very high. And so, you know, their friends give them a hard time. You know, when it's time to get off, it's time to get off. And, you know, we have friends where, you know, their kids can stay on pretty late, you know, and we don't play like that. They have to turn their phones in. Whenever we go to bed, they've got to turn everything in, devices, laptops, Chromebooks, cell phones, iPads, everything. And they turn it in and they put it right next to our nightstand. But, you know, their friends tease them a little bit, but that self-esteem that they have, they're like, it's nothing. It's what it is. You know, it's what we do. And they're okay with that. And they're fine getting maybe teased a little bit, but it just kind of brush it off as, you know, no big deal. And now their friends are just like, okay, we get it. You know, we respect that. And it is what it is. As far as consequences goes, you know, I don't really get into consequences via Zoom when I don't know the whole situation. And I don't know the child, so I don't really want to go there too much. But I can say that, you know, from my own personal experience, if my child was not willing to, you know, they didn't want to give up their cell phone, or they don't want to give up their laptop, or you know, whatever it is, when it's time to go to bed, they lose the device. It's that simple. You know, and I don't go crazy. It doesn't get broken or tossed or anything like that, but I'll take it out of the house and I'll put it in my car so they can't get it. Not that they would try, but I have heard of parents who've, you know, they're like, well, if I hide it in the closet, my child will find it when I'm at work. I tell them, you know, put it in your trunk of your car, give it to your neighbor or a friend, you know, down the street, and let them hold it in their closet, you know, for a few days to show them that you're serious. You know, I've showed my son a couple of times that real easily I can turn off his cell phone data and just shut it down. And I mean, that's a big motivator right there. So with the click of a button. So just things like that. You don't have to get too drastic, but you know, just do what you can within, you know, your ability to try to enforce and stick with those consequences and make sure they're not idle threats. But yeah, the self-esteem is the big, I think that's the key to student success in terms of being able to, you know, be engaged in school and help them learn and continue to learn.
Thank you, Brian. From the panel, is there any last minute thoughts before we go to the chat on this particular question? Okay, anything in the chat, Wendy and Felicia?
Mr. Humphrey, wonderful principal at
Yeah.
Bel Air, has put in the chat asking if we are aware of PTSD or persistent traumatic stress environment. And if so, he was wondering what role it plays with teens and tweens disengagement.
Anybody on the panel that would like to address that?
So that's PTSD.
Persistent traumatic stress environment. It's a new term for me. So after this, Mr. Humphrey, I'm going to go Google it and then I'll message you. But good new term, and we'll do some research and see if we can find out more about that. He did the same thing. That is funny, Robert. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So we're going to move to question 4. And this question is, how do we successfully support our teens transition back to in-person learning? So we all know we're coming back in the fall for the most part. Some of them are coming back this summer. Leanne, yes, Leanne, can you help us kind of talk about how we can help our teens transition back?
Sure. So I think it's really important that we start to establish those routines and talk about what school will be like again, probably a few weeks to a month ahead of time. So towards mid-July to late July, start talking about school, start setting routines, slowly start getting them up early, adjust bedtimes, limit their use on their devices. And like Brian said, I was laughing because I was thinking, like, you turn off the internet if you have to limit their time on their devices, which it can be hard for a lot of families, me included, because those devices have been kind of the social aspect that our kids have had during this time. But you have to start limiting those things because during the school year, they really should be limited anyway. You also want to think about things that get them excited about going back to school, whether that's shopping for new clothes or school supplies, or if it's seeing their friends that they've missed, whatever it is, you begin having those positive conversations so they really have something to look forward to. You need to remember that it's an adjustment for all of us, and so you need to give them grace. Our students don't have the stamina that they have had for sitting in that classroom for 7 hours a day. So it's going to be a lot for them to adjust. They've had a lot of freedom. They've had a lot of time to sleep in, to possibly be lazy. So for the entire family, it's going to be a huge adjustment. So be patient, be supportive, listen to what they need. If something isn't working well when they start going back to school, adjust and try a new strategy. Talk to the counselor. That's what we're here for. Talk to the teacher, talk to the administration. If there are concerns and struggles, we're here to help. We're here to support with that transition. We really want to work with it as a team and be there for all of you.
Leanne. Mandy, do you want to add to that?
I would love to add to that. And what I want to say, especially to the people in the chat that were talking about lack of motivation and mental health issues as it applies to going back now to school. This is completely uncharted territory for everybody. We can get up here and act like we know what we're talking about, and we do know what we're talking about, but we have never been through this before. And I think it's going to be really, really important to really listen to what the experience is of especially the teenagers that can articulate it pretty well, what their experience is about going back. I know the adults are anxious. I'm sure the kids are anxious. And I think really listening and being a little flexible and letting them know that their well-being is probably even more important than school in this transition. I don't think it's going to be that easy for some of the kids. Some of the kids had a really easy time with the distance learning. Some of them were so unmotivated and just spiraled downward. And whoever put that in the chat should know they're not alone with that, and that a lack of motivation is not the same as apathy, even though it looks like that sometimes from the outside. The kids are tormented, a lot of them, at how unmotivated they were and how far they fell back and how much they feel like a failure at this point. And those kids especially are probably thinking the grass is greener on the other side. Now they want to go back to school. I've heard so many kids tell me, I'm so sorry. I said I didn't want to go back to school. I can't wait to go back to school. But now when they go back to school, it's not going to be what they remembered it was when they left. And I think that's going to set a few kids up for being very depressed and very anxious. And all we can really do, because we don't know how it feels, is to listen to what they're saying and talk to each other, talk to other parents, talk to the counselor. Let's have a dialogue about it and keep the line of communication open, because we really don't know how it's going to affect any given student. And on the same note about listening, I just want to say that I had a very long conversation today with one of my students, not about you're not going to graduate or graduate, but just about what their experience has been so far. And she told me something that opened my eyes completely to a different way to look at this. And that's, I'm going to tell you what she said, but that's why I feel like it's important that we listen and not just tell them what we're expecting of them. She said to me that, she said, you know, I know it's hard for the teachers too. They keep saying how hard it is for them to be on video also, but you guys grew up in another time. We grew up with social media where we have control of our phones and our realities, and we can control what we show people on Facebook, and we can control what we put on TikTok, and we're kind of in control of who we are and what we are on social media. And school has kind of come into the realm this past 9 months, into their social media territory where they're used to being in control, and now they're not. They have their phones, they have their computers, you know, but if we're expecting them to put their Zoom cameras on and be present in their houses and be exposed that way, that's 180 degrees from what they're comfortable doing with their cameras in their rooms. They're used to setting it up, and they set it, you know, we didn't grow up that way, but they've grown up that way. So when she was talking to me, I realized how completely different her experience was of those Zoom meetings, that it probably took her 9 months to be able to actually articulate it than I had imagined that it was. I never even thought about how their lack of control and there was more pronounced for them than it is for us, because they control that so well all the time. And it made me feel like I needed to listen even more now to what they're saying going back, because I think they're going to feel even less control now. So I know it's probably not helpful, but I feel like the conversation needs to continue with the adults about what's happening with the kids, so that we can all compare notes, because we don't really know how it's going to affect the kids.
And like you're saying, Mandy, you know, I know we're all excited, especially as adults, that our kids are going back, but we have to expect that it may be uncomfortable for a while. And if you start to feel that your child is struggling, please reach out to your school personnel early. You know, don't wait until it gets to become a crisis, because that's part, I mean, what we're doing as a school is trying to anticipate and figure out what types of supports can we provide for the students as they come back, because we know that there's going to be a variety of emotions, not only from our students, from our parents and from staff. So as Mandy said, this is a whole new realm that none of us have done experience before, but we want to partner with you as parents around how we're going to be able to support your students or your children in the fall. For the panelists, is there any last minute thoughts for this particular question? And then we'll go to the chat. Paula.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that our children have gone through multiple transitions since, you know, this time last year, so over a year. And I don't know if this is a term, but transition fatigue. If it's not, we should create it. So, you know, we're all a little fatigued at how things have changed so much and so many times, you know. And, you know, expectations have changed. And that is really, when it comes to kids, you know, creating clear expectations is so important. So they know what to do. Mm-hmm. Telling them what to do, telling them what the expectations are so essential. So it's just, you know, another transition that we all will be going through. And then I wanted to just touch on sleep and how important that is. And I know our children, you know, are sleep fatigued for many reasons. And so, like Leanne said, starting at least a month before school starts, really working on those sleep routines. It takes time to transition back to a good sleep routine. And that's so important,
Thank
especially
you.
for those gamers out there. Yeah.
Yeah, great. All right. From the chat, is there anything that we should address at this time?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. One parent wanted us to know that when regarding her child's self-esteem, that would they go ahead and they tell her, no, 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 you're great, you're beautiful, you're doing fine. And she says, yeah, you're just saying that because you're my mom. And so, you know, my friends don't say that. And so sort of how to address that peer pressure. And I think the other question kind of ties into that. And that was a parent who's concerned that as her child gets out of the house more, that he may return to using marijuana and, you know, kind of following that peer influence. So I think we can tie those questions together to ask, how do you sort of counterbalance that peer influence, especially at a time when kids are really vulnerable?
Is there anyone on the panel that feels comfortable answering that?
I'll answer the first. Oh, sorry, Paula, were you gonna, you can jump in. I'll go after you.
Okay. Yeah. So I think it ties into finding their own identity and helping nurture their self-esteem. Something I thought of with my own children, have 4. So they're kind of all, you know, they have their own identities and their own interests. And what I have gone through with each of them is encouraging them to continue to try things and to try and figure out, you know, what do I like? What am I interested in? And it takes some effort, you know, on the parents' part to, you know, continue to investigate and look into different options for your kids. But if you can help them find their interests and give them the opportunity to connect with their peers who have similar interests, it gives them positive ways of connecting with their peers. And that peer influence is so important. It's so vital, like we've talked about. So there are lots of ways our children can connect in negative ways and destructive ways with their peers, but to help them find and identify those things that they're passionate about and they're interested in, so that they have those ways of connecting in positive ways with other people their age that share similar interests.
Thank you. Angela, did you want to add?
Sure, you did a really good job, Paula, explaining that. And I love just echoing really quick. Yeah, the more positive experiences you can find, I think even for teens, finding a job and doing other things like that can be a very positive thing to kind of get them away from maybe a certain crowd. I don't know. I did that with my son. You know, he started driving, so he needed money, so he got a job, but it really helped too to steer him in a more positive direction, where he's working with other people that are working and going to school and things like that. So he just started getting influenced by other people. And then the one other little thing I wanted to add was for the parent that was talking about self-esteem in their daughter. That is an issue that I hear, you know, the generic, you're beautiful, you're this. Of course, as parents, we say that when we mean it because that is how we feel. But it's very easy for a child or a teen to dismiss that. And so I really like, it's kind of Carol Dweck and growth mindset, but putting it more to effort-based things. Like, I saw you worked really hard on this paper. I saw that you took the dog out for a walk. It looked like he really needed that, and really start to build up their self-esteem by what they're doing. I saw you talking to your little brother. I saw you helped him, you know, with his math problem. Things like that, they can take in and say, yeah, I did do that. I am good at that. Or, you know, so it's finding those moments where you can give them praise for things that they have done that is maybe more meaningful than just their physical self and things, and saying, you know, you're beautiful, you're wonderful. And I mean, keep saying those things. Those things are great, but also to really put it onto concrete things.
Thank you. And finding opportunities where children can find success, and completing, you know, a goal or a project builds that self-esteem. And so, you know, sometimes it's a joint effort. Sometimes it's identifying that they've made a goal, and when they've reached that, celebrating that. You know, we hear that many times around, you know, engaging in athletics or clubs or some type of arts where you're working collaboratively with others also helps build that self-esteem, because you feel comfortable in what you're doing and you're performing. So those are additional pieces that I would also add. So I'm going to move to question 5, and then we're still watching the chat. I definitely will continue to put a link to past webinars, because some of the questions more around self-harm, anxiety, I definitely am encouraging people to watch the other 2 webinars, because we do go in great detail in those webinars, and I think they would be very, very worthwhile if you're concerned about your child with anxiety or depression, any kind of self-harm or hurting themselves. They would be very, very beneficial to take the time to watch those. So for question 5, how do I foster independence with my teen or tween? Angela.
Yeah, well, I think first it's really important to think that it's normal for teens and parents to disagree. Like when you're talking about independence, their idea of independence is very different than ours a lot of the time. I know if I go back to when I was a teen, I thought I had everything figured out. I didn't need a curfew. You know, I don't know why my parents didn't just, you know, trust me, all these things, you know, when you realize that it's, you know, your parents have rules and boundaries for your own good. So it's just really good to, when you talk about independence, to know that the conflict and the struggle between parenting and teen is normal and natural. And it's kind of seeing how we can find that middle ground and that relationship, which is really the key. And one thing that maybe also does not sound super intuitive when you think of independence, but I find is a key area in helping, is to really take time to create family rules, because we know that the teenage brain needs structure, they need boundaries, they need clear expectations and consistency. And that's kind of come out, I know, in different panelists when we've all been talking. And what that helps them really feel is in control, because they need that sense of control during these years. So with that, family rules, first it's your family's rules. So that is what's important. And I have framed it, at least for my kids, around safety at first, because that makes sense to them. And so they can go, okay, these are rules to keep me safe. And so that has helped. And so then they go along with, you know, the ones that your family can decide around curfew, alcohol, you know, phone use. We've heard bedtimes. I think those are really good things. And then I also kind of add this little caveat of exploring what your family values are and how we communicate, how, you know, what trust is, what respect is. And these are really great conversations, because as Mandy had mentioned once before, listening to your kid is incredible. And so creating with them the family rules, it's not you being the authoritarian always, but listening and having their input and asking them questions like, what do you think is fair? Why? You know, really challenging them on that. So you establish rules that you all feel comfortable with. And yes, there might be a few, you are the parent, that you do get to say, well, this is what I'm comfortable with, but you can explain why you have that boundary and why it's important. And then hopefully we'll all be like Brian's kids, and they'll have that good self-confidence that they'll go, see, I don't even mind, I have to put my phone up, you know. And I think that is important, because they'll understand why you're doing this. And so that's really key. And another huge piece to this, I think, is that tell your kids what the consequences will be if they break the rules, because they're going to push. That's their nature. They're risk takers, all this. So if you establish this when they do break the rules, it's time for growth. It's time for learning. It's time to, like it or not, kind of get them to that independent stage where they need to be, because we are their teachers and that's what we are doing with them. And so you kind of want them to make a few mistakes while they're under your watch, and have these opportunities where maybe they didn't follow a rule exactly, and then you can talk about it and why it's important, and then stick to your consequences. Stick to what you said you will do. Like Brian had said, if you have to put their phone in your car and drive it to work with you, that's okay, because you agreed to it. They might be mad, but that's okay if they're mad, because they also agreed to these consequences. I know with both my kids, I did cell phone contracts with them and I had them sign it. And, they were so excited to get their phones. We had this discussion like I'm talking about. Then they signed their contract and I put it up on our refrigerator. And sure enough, with my son, especially, he tests boundaries more than my daughter. I would have to point to that contract where he signed it. So when I took his phone, there wasn't a big argument, and he's an arguer, but it's kind of like, oh yeah, this was our agreed plan. So I find that is really, really good parenting strategy and relationship builder too. Because that's what we want for our kids, is to have this great relationship. And yeah, just know that they are watching us. They pretend like they don't want us, but they do. They do need you to drag them down from the bedroom every now and then, and just connect with them. So I think when we're talking about independence, it's kind of an interesting thing, because we're just teaching them, but they still want our guidance in that relationship.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I want to be mindful of our time.
You're doing fine.
We're
You're
doing
fine.
okay.
Mhm.
Okay. So just to tag on to that, and I don't know how much more I could add. That was really wonderful. So I just thought of some of the questions I asked myself as a parent when my children started to push for more independence. And some of the questions I thought of were, is my child mature enough to handle this responsibility? Am I ready to give my child the opportunity to handle this responsibility? And what happens if my kid fails to act responsibly in the situation? What are the consequences? So I just thought back to, some of the situations that I found myself in when my kid is asking me to, go downtown alone at 8 o'clock at night. Of course, fear and terror goes through my mind first. And then, I had to really think through, okay, what am I okay with? What am I not okay with? What are the expectations? And what happens if they don't meet those expectations? A few things that I learned through, I'm not through raising 4 children, but they're ages 8 to 23. So I've made a lot of mistakes, and definitely one size does not fit all. Just because my daughter was ready for the independence of going downtown alone in 7th grade did not mean my son was. And so I definitely got those phone calls from other moms like, do you know what our boys are doing down there? Oh no, really? So one size does not fit all. And that's definitely something to keep in mind, is our children mature differently. They mature at different rates. And I think you have to, know your child, have those conversations, and kind of go with your gut and knowing, is my child really ready for this responsibility, or do we want to kind of baby step? So a few things when it comes to independence with our teens and tweens: set clear expectations. Like Angela said, before they are allowed to do something, you're going to answer these questions: who, what, when, where, how. What happens if the plan changes? What communication needs to be had? Keep open communication with other parents. So this one I found is really important. Have the phone numbers of the parents of the kids that your kids are hanging out with, because you may be getting one story from your kid, but the other kids may be telling their parents something completely different. So being in communication with other parents, I think that way you can at least try to get the full picture, what's going on. Start small, like I said. So if you're concerned your child's not ready for a certain responsibility, give them an opportunity to be successful. Give them little opportunities to show that they're ready to handle a responsibility before you throw them into something that they're not ready to handle and it causes a big mess. I think technology is can be really helpful as well in allowing our children more independence. I am not a huge fan of all technology, but my children would not be able to do certain things now without a cell phone. So cell phones, we use them. They're an important tool in allowing our children to have increased independence. And then using some type of technology to track your children where they are. My children have, gotten into some situations where that has come in handy at least 3 times. So it might seem like you're stalking your child. You have a right to stalk your child. And if it's a difficult situation they find themselves in, you want to know where they are. So technology can be really helpful. Let's see what else. Oh, so just finally, like I really want to find the positive, and I try to find the positive in everything. So when your children do act responsibly, celebrate it. When they show up on time, thank you. Thank you for being on time. I didn't have to worry about you. Thank you so much. Let them know you appreciate it. Praise them for making good choices. And when you do allow them more freedom, let them know why. Hey, you know what? You handled this really well. You were really responsible. You set a good example for, so-and-so. I appreciate that. So I'm allowing you to do this because of how you handle that situation. So, yeah.
Thank you, Paula. Any last minute thoughts from the panelists for this particular question? Okay, I'm going to move to question 5 just because we are getting close to time. We're good. The last questions, don't get nervous, but and this is for Paula. You get to keep going. How can you encourage resilience in your team? Oh, you're on mute. There you go.
Okay, there we go. So I think of resilience. I'm a very visual learner, so like a rubber band. So resilience is the ability for us and our children to go through challenges, difficulties that we all face, move through them and be able to snap back. So like a rubber band, the challenge is being stretched, and once they've worked through it, the rubber band goes back to shape. So that's kind of how I visualize resiliency. So our children are capable of dealing with difficult situations, even trauma. And I know that this past year has really tested their resiliency. And I think, it will come to see how resilient our children really are. But I believe that resiliency can be developed. It can be encouraged. But I do believe that our children are very resilient. All kids, they encounter stress in varying degrees as they grow. And as parents, we sometimes have a tendency to want to protect our children and shelter them. And it's hard for us to watch them go through really difficult situations. But something that I heard many years ago, I keep it in the back of my mind, is don't steal their struggle. Don't steal the struggle. So, I mean, and you can see examples of that all over in the natural world. But through struggle is really how we grow. We grow muscles. We test ourselves. We push ourselves through. And so we can be supportive and encouraging and model the skills, you know, that are required to go through some difficult things. But be there to support your child. Don't steal their struggle. It's how they learn and grow. Let's see. Spending one-on-one time with your kids has been researched and shown to help them develop, you know, healthy, positive relationships, help them learn skills to go through challenges. And I know we've talked about this a little bit, but in building resiliency, what I've learned is that one-on-one connection that parents have with their children is really important. So setting time aside to, if you have many children, to really focus on each child and make sure that you're spending that one-on-one time with them can really help them develop the skills necessary to face some challenging situations. Promoting healthy risk-taking. So like I said, don't steal the struggle, allow them those situations that might push them, might test them, but will allow them to kind of grow through those challenges. Let's see what else. Modeling problem-solving skills. So that doesn't mean answering all their questions, solving all their problems. It's talking through problems, and a lot of times they'll have more creative answers than we could come up with in solving a lot of their problems. But taking the time to talk through that and helping your children solve their own problems.
They also have great creative consequences. Sometimes the
Thank you.
consequences I would ask my child would be way worse than I was going to give, but I'm like, okay.
Definitely.
Just a little tidbit. I was just like, wow, that was a, do I want to add something to the end? I should have waited, Paula. Keep going.
No, they definitely overkill when it comes to consequences. So yeah, that's always funny. Yeah, and then I think like just normalizing mistakes, you know, embracing that mistakes are made. And we keep going, we fall down, we keep going. It's normal to make mistakes. It's not the end of the world. Yeah, you know, it doesn't feel good, but it's part of learning and growing. Yeah, and so also I think something that I've really been trying to focus on is my own language. So modeling more positive, more growth mindset verbiage. And there's a lot of information out there on growth mindset, and it relates to resiliency. So that would be something, if you're interested in growth mindset, I would look into that at a later date. But just the way that we talk is really important.
Yeah, and in the comments, somebody had shared, you know, you always sharing with your child, you know, loving them for who they are, not what they do. And so when and if they do make a mistake or they do make a poor choice, focusing on that act versus that you don't love them. And I think it's very important to differentiate. I think sometimes kids see, well, you did such a bad job on that. They think you're talking that they're a bad kid. And we have to separate the action from the feeling. And so I appreciate that comment that one of the attendees shared in the chat. Okay, from the panelists, any last minute thoughts for this last question before we close up this evening? Okay, I know that we had a couple of questions that we maybe didn't get specifically to. I think we tried to incorporate as many as we could in the chat. We also have some resources that we'll be putting on the screen, and we also put a link to the chat for those of you that are live. You can get a clickable link, but you'll also be able to see these resources on the district website under student services at the mental health webinar page. So if Felicia, any last minute thoughts that we have that you would need to do before we pull up the last slide for Mario?
We pretty much have covered many of the comments in the chat. And we've also given links or resources there, but just want to encourage parents to just reach out and continue to be a partner with us in supporting your children.
And we thank you for joining us this evening. We encourage you to visit the webinar page, join us in June for 2 editions. If you know somebody you think this might help, please share the link. We know many people are able to watch on the recording, and there is a space on that district website for any comments or questions or suggestions around these future webinars. If you're not comfortable with sending filling out a form, you can reach out to any of your counselors, or Felicia, I, or Wendy. This has just been in evolving resource that we started this year, and we're adjusting, and we do look forward to continuing to provide this support to our students, families, and staff and community. So thank you so much for joining us this evening. And we hope you have a great evening, and now you can actually go have dinner. And you'll see the link on our district on our website here of our resources. And we'll also put that in the link in the chat as well.